Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really crucial if you're using the latest AI models, OpenAI's brand new prompting guide.
That's right, specifically for their GPT 4.1 family.
And think of this as your personal walkthrough, kind of, to getting truly exceptional results from these powerful tools.
Exactly.
Have you ever felt like you could be getting more out of your AI interactions? I know I have.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this guide helps you unlock.
So whether you're a coder looking for, more reliable AI help,
Or maybe someone who needs AI to follow really complex multi-step instructions perfectly.
right, or dealing with just mountains of texts.
Yeah, analyzing huge documents. This guide has the keys to making GPT 4.1 work for you really effectively.
And we've gone through the whole thing, the official GPT 4.1 prompting guide from the OpenAI Cookbook. It just came out, right? April 14th.
Yep, just yesterday. We've sifted through it to pull out the insights that, well, we think will make the biggest difference for listeners.
Okay, great. And one of the first things that jumps out, apparently, is a pretty fundamental shift in how GPT 4.1 understands us compared to, say, older models,
That's a great way to put it. It's like they've become incredibly attentive listeners.
but with a twist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The guide really emphasizes that GPT 4.1 follows your instructions much more closely, much more literally than previous generations.
Literally, huh? So less guesswork on its part.
Right. Where older models might have tried to figure out your broader intention, GPT 4.1 really takes your words at face value.
Okay, so what does that mean for us? Do we need to change how we prompt?
Well, it means some of the techniques you might have relied on before,
Mm-hmm.
they might need a little rethink, but the upside is huge.
Okay.
You get a much higher degree of control. They call it high steerability.
High steerability. I like that.
Yeah. So if the model isn't doing quite what you want, a clear, direct instruction is now like your most powerful tool to guide it back.
Okay. So it's less like a helpful assistant who sometimes gets it wrong and more like one that just hangs on your every word.
Right. That's a pretty good analogy, yeah.
All right, let's dive into the first big area the guide covers, agentic workflows. Now that sounds fancy. What does it actually mean?
It sounds a bit technical, but the core idea is really interesting. It's about how GPT 4.1 can excel when you give it more autonomy to tackle problems.
Economy. So not just answering one question at a time.
Exactly. Instead of just responding to single prompts, you can set it up to act more like an agent, thinking through steps, using tools on its own, all to reach a solution.
Okay, that sounds potentially game-changing for complex stuff.
It really could be. The guide even mentions a pretty impressive 55% solve rate on a coding benchmark, SWE bench, verified it's called.
55% on coding.
Yeah, for the non-reasoning models using their specific agentic setup. For users, this could mean AI being way more capable of handling complex coding tasks.
Like what, automating debugging, maybe even implementing features?
Potentially, yeah, and with much greater reliability than before. Imagine the time savings if the AI could just find and fix bugs independently.
That is a huge leap. So how do we actually get GPT 4.1 to act like this eager agent, as you put it? The guide talks about specific reminders.
Right, reminders in the initial system prompt. Think of them as setting the ground rules, the basic expectations for the AI agent.
Okay, ground rules. Makes sense.
And the guide highlights three key types. The first one is persistence.
Persistence. So basically telling it not to give up.
Pretty much. It's all about ensuring the agent keeps working until the task is truly completely done, not just stopping halfway.
And how do you phrase that? What's the instruction look like?
This is just something direct, like,
Yeah.
you're an agent. Please keep going until the user's query is completely resolved before ending your turn and yielding back to the user. Only terminate your turn when you are sure that the problem is solved.
It sounds simple, but I can see how that shifts the dynamic.
It really does. It flips a switch from a passive chatbot to an active problem solver that actually takes ownership.
Establishing commitment up front. Got it. What's the second reminder?
The second one is crucial if you're using external tools. Tool calling.
Oh, okay. Like letting it search the web or read files or run code.
Exactly. This reminder encourages it to use those tools when it needs information, rather than just, guessing or making stuff up.
Which we all know can happen. Hallucinations, right?
Right. So the instruction is like, look, you have resources, use them, don't just invent an answer.
What's the example they give?
Something like, if you are not sure about file content or code-based structure pertaining to the user's request, use your tools to read files and gather the relevant information. Do not guess or make up an answer.
Pretty direct.
And they also strongly recommend using the dedicated tools field in the API request to define these tools. Don't just describe them in the text.
Oh, that's interesting. Why the specific API field?
Apparently, they saw a 2% improvement in their benchmark scores just by structuring tool definitions that way through the API.
2%. Okay, that might sound small, but at the cutting edge, that's actually a noticeable bump in reliability, isn't it?
It really can be, yeah. Every little bit helps.
And the third reminder type, something about planning.
Yes, planning. The guide says it's optional, but it can significantly boost effectiveness, especially for harder problems.
Okay, planning. What's the idea there?
The idea is to prompt the AI to explicitly think and reflect between using its tools. So it's not just blindly making one tool call after another without a strategy.
So getting it to sort of show its work, think out loud.
Exactly, like thinking out loud. The example instruction is, you must plan extensively before each function call and reflect extensively on the outcomes of the previous function calls. Do not do this entire process by making function calls only, because that can impair its thinking.
Okay, so even though 4.1 isn't strictly a reasoning model itself,
Right. It's not inherently built for that deep reasoning like some others maybe claim to be.
this kind of prompting can actually induce a more methodical approach.
Precisely. And they saw another jump in scores from this, a 4% increase on their benchmark just by adding that planning instruction.
Wow, okay, 4% plus the 2% from the tool definition. These specific instructions really add up.
They absolutely do. It shows how crucial good prompting is for these agentic tasks.
Now, about those tools themselves, the guide says clear definitions are vital. It's not just enough to say, use the search tool.
Definitely not. GPT 4.1 is much better at using tools when they're clearly defined via the API. Think of it like a well-organized toolbox.
With clear labels on everything.
Exactly. Clear labels, instructions on how to use each tool. They really advise against just describing tools in the prompt text and then trying to parse the output yourself.
Right, use the dedicated tools field in the API. That sounds more robust.
It is. And they also stress using clear descriptive names for your tools and their parameters. Precision matters here.
Like labeling all the buttons properly on a complex machine.
Okay.
And for more complex tools, they suggest adding examples.
Correct. They recommend an hashtag example section right in your system prompt. This is where you demonstrate how to use trickier tools effectively.
So not just what the tool is, but when and how to use it.
Exactly. Showing when to use it, what parameters are needed in different situations, whether to include user text. It gives concrete illustrations.
It really sounds like setting the stage properly with that system prompt, reminders, tool definitions, examples is absolutely fundamental for these agentic workflows.
It's the foundation, definitely.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about something that sounds like a massive upgrade. The 1 million token input context window. That's huge.
It is enormous. The guide has a whole section on long context.
1 million tokens. What's that, like a whole novel?
Roughly, yeah. A pretty substantial book. And this opens up possibilities for tasks involving just vast amounts of data.
Like what kind of tasks?
The guide highlights things like feeding in entire long documents for parsing, maybe re-ranking huge sets of search results, finding specific info in massive data sets.
Or even reasoning across all that information, like connecting dots between different parts of a giant document.
Exactly, multi-hop reasoning. Imagine analyzing an entire legal case file or a massive technical spec in one go.
That's incredible potential. But with so much context, does the model get lost? The guide mentions optimal context size. Is bigger always better?
That's a really important point they raise. While it can handle 1M tokens, performance might dip a bit if the task needs it to find very specific, scattered bits of info, or do really complex reasoning across the entire span.
Okay, so it's like searching for a needle in an increasingly giant haystack.
Kind of, yeah. The bigger the haystack, the harder the search. So
Right.
it's not always just throw everything in. The task itself and how the info is structured within that context really matter.
Strategic use of memory, then. What about controlling what the model focuses on? Can we tell it to stick to the documents we provide versus using its own knowledge? The guide mentions tuning context reliance.
Yes, and this is super powerful. You can actually instruct GPT 4.1 on how much to prioritize the external context you feed it versus its internal pre-trained knowledge.
How do you do that?
Well, for instance, if you want it to only use the documents you provided, you could say something like, only use the documents in the provided external context. If you don't know the answer from this context, say, I don't have the information needed.
Okay, so locking it down to just the provided info.
Right. Or, conversely, If you want it to mostly use your context, but maybe fill in gaps with general knowledge, you could say, by default, use the provided external context. But if other basic knowledge is needed, you can use some of your own knowledge.
That gives you amazing control over accuracy and relevance, preventing it from just wandering off.
Exactly. It keeps it grounded in the information you deem important for the task.
So when we are using these very long prompts, stuffing in lots of context, how should we structure the prompt itself? Does
You
the
know,
order matter?
It does, according to their tests. The guide has advice on prompt organization. Especially for long contexts, they recommend putting your main instructions at both the beginning and the very end of all the context material.
Sandwiching the context with instructions?
Yeah, like bookends. Their experiments showed this sandwiching works better than just putting instructions at the start or just at the end.
Interesting. And if you only put them in once?
Then putting them above the context generally perform better than putting them below it. The key is making sure those critical instructions don't get lost in the middle of a huge block of text.
Right. Make sure the AI gets the memo coming and going. Okay, let's move to chain of thought, or COT prompting. We touched on it with agents, but there's a dedicated section. Seems like even if 4.1 isn't a reasoning model per se.
Right, it doesn't have that innate step-by-step internal reasoning process some models might aim for.
COT is still useful for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Prompting it to explicitly break down problems, to think step by step in its output, can still significantly improve the quality of the final answer.
What's the downside?
Well, the guide notes the trade-off is usually cost and latency. Because the model is generating all those intermediate thinking steps, it uses more tokens and takes longer to respond.
Okay, so it's a tool, but maybe not for every single prompt.
Yeah.
How do you get started with COT for GPT 4.1?
They suggest starting simple. Just add a basic COTI instruction at the end of your regular prompt.
Like what?
Something like COTI. First, think carefully, step by step, about what documents are needed to answer the query. Then, print out the title and ID of each document. Then, format the IDs into a list. It gives a clear starting structure for its thought process.
And if that basic approach isn't quite cutting it, how do we refine it?
The key is analysis. Look at where the model is failing. The guide advises auditing the bad responses.
Playing detective on the AI's mistakes?
Pretty much.
Uh-huh.
Common issues are things like misunderstanding the user's actual question, not using the provided context well enough, or just having logical gaps in its step-by-step thinking.
Okay.
Once you spot those patterns, you can add more specific targeted instructions to address those exact weak points. It's iterative.
Trial, error, analyze, refine.
Got it.
The guide gives an example of a more structured reasoning strategy. What does that look like?
Yeah, that advanced example breaks reasoning down into clear phases. Like, first, query analysis, really digging into the user's request.
Okay.
Then context analysis, carefully going through the documents, maybe even rating their relevance.
Relevance ratings, interesting.
And finally, synthesis, pulling it all together for the answer. This structured approach pushes it towards much more methodical thinking than just think step by step.
That sounds like a powerful way to guide its process, even if it's induced. Okay, let's talk about something GPT 4.1 is supposedly really good at. Instruction following?
Yes, this is definitely highlighted as a major strength. The guide uses terms like outstanding instruction following performance.
Outstanding. So we get really fine-grained control.
That's the idea. You can precisely dictate almost everything. The reasoning steps it shows, the tone it uses, how it calls tools, the exact output format, even topics to completely avoid.
Whoa. But wait, you said earlier it takes instructions very literally. Does that mean we have to be more careful with our instructions now?
Yes, that's the flip side. Because it's not relying as much on guessing your intent, you often need to spell things out very clearly.
So prompts that worked okay with older, perhaps more forgiving models?
Might need more detail, more explicitness to get the same results with GPT 4.1. It won't read between the lines as much.
Okay. The guide gives a recommended workflow for developing instructions. What's the gist of that?
They suggest a layered approach. Start broad with a high-level response rules or instructions section, maybe using bullet points.
General guidelines first.
Right. Then, if you need more detail on specific things, add dedicated sections, like hashtag sample phrases to show the desired language style.
Okay.
And if you needed to follow a strict sequence of steps, use ordered lists. They're very effective for workflows.
Makes sense. Start broad, then layer in specifics. What if it's still not following instructions correctly? Troubleshooting tips.
Check for common issues. First, conflicting instructions 4.1 tends to follow the later instruction if they clash.
Ah, okay, order matters there.
Also, check if instructions are too vague, underspecified, or just plain wrong. And examples are crucial.
Right, show, don't just tell.
Exactly. Make sure any key behaviors you show in examples are also explicitly stated in the rules. Oh, and they also mention you probably don't need to shout in all cap yes or use weird incentives.
Uh-huh. Good to know. Keep it professional.
Generally, yes. Clear and direct is better than gimmicky.
The guide also warns about some common failure modes. What kind of traps should we watch out for?
One is being too strict. Like if you say it must call a tool, but it doesn't have the info needed for the tool call.
It might just make something up to satisfy the instruction.
Exactly. It might hallucinate tool inputs or call it with null values.
Yeah.
The fix is usually to add a condition. If you don't have enough info, ask the user first.
Okay, build in an escape hatch. What else?
Using sample phrases can backfire sometimes. The model might just repeat them verbatim.
Leading to robotic, repetitive answers.
Yeah. So you might need to explicitly tell it to vary its phrasing, use synonyms, etc.
Right. Anything else?
Just that if you don't specify the output format clearly, it might add extra conversational fluff for formatting you don't want. So be specific about the desired output structure.
These are really practical pointers. And they wrap this section up with a customer service example prompt.
Yes, a detailed example prompt. Customer service. It really showcases putting all these best practices together, clear rules, sections for specifics like tone and steps, sample phrases, and a full interaction example. It's a good model to study.
Okay, great. So after all that specific instruction stuff, the guide has some more general advice, broad tips.
Yeah, some valuable overarching recommendations. They offer a suggested prompt structure as a good starting point.
Like a template.
Kind of. It includes sections like hashtag role and objective, hashtag instructions, maybe with subsections, hashtag reasoning steps if using COT, hashtag output format, hashtag examples, hashtag context, and finally, hashtag final instructions and prompt to think, step by step.
That sounds pretty comprehensive.
It is, but they stress it's just a starting point. You should definitely experiment and adapt it for your specific use case.
Right, tailor it. What about visually organizing prompts? They mention delimiters.
Yeah, using clear separators helps the model parse the different parts of your prompt instructions, context, examples, etc.
So things like headings and lists.
Exactly. They suggest Markdown as a good starting point,
Yeah.
using hash symbols, hashtag for titles, backticks for code, bullet points, numbered lists.
Simple and effective. Any other options?
They also mention XML can be really robust, especially if you need to wrap sections precisely or include metadata within tags.
Okay. And JSON.
They know JSON can be a bit verbose, and you have to be careful with escaping special characters, so Markdown or XML might be easier starting points.
Got it. And specifically for feeding in tons of documents, like in that long context scenario, any preferred formats there?
Yes, they did specific testing on this. XML worked well, using tags to define documents like docme1title.doc.
Okay.
And also a simpler format researchers often use, ID1 title, some title content, the actual text. That performed well too.
And what didn't work so well?
Interestingly, they found JSON tended to perform poorly when dealing with a very large number of documents in the context.
Huh. Okay, so maybe stick to XML or that simple ID title content format for bulk document loading.
That seems to be the advice, yeah. Use your judgment based on the content, but those formats showed promise. Clarity is key.
Good specific advice there. The general section also includes caveats, right? Potential pitfalls or limitations.
A couple important ones. First, the model might sometimes resist generating extremely long, repetitive outputs.
Like if you ask it to list 1,000 items?
Something like that.
Yeah.
If you need that, the advice is to instruct it very strongly to output everything or maybe break the task down into smaller chunks.
Okay. Manage expectations or the task itself. What else?
They also mention rare instances where they've seen incorrect behavior with parallel tool calls. That's an advanced feature where it calls multiple tools at once.
Ah, okay. So if you're using that and getting weird results.
It might be worth testing with parallel calls turned off just to isolate the issue. It seems rare, but something to be aware of.
Good to know the edge cases. Okay, finally, there's an appendix specifically about generating and applying file diffs. This sounds super relevant for developers.
Absolutely. This highlights a significant improvement in the GPT-4.1 family handling code changes, or diffs.
Making it better at coding tasks that involve modifying existing code.
Exactly. They've even defined and open-sourced a recommended format for these diffs, called V4A, which the model has been specifically trained on.
V4A. Okay, a standard way to talk code changes with the AI. What's special about it?
It's designed to be robust for AI generation. It includes clear markers, specifies the file and the action, Add, update, delete. For updates, it uses context lines around the change. Lines to be removed start with all. Lines to add start with +a.
And importantly,
Importantly, it doesn't rely on line numbers, which can get messed up easily when AI modifies code. It uses the surrounding context to pinpoint the change.
that makes a lot of sense. Context, not just line numbers.
Right. And they even provide a Python script, applypatch.py, as a reference for how to actually apply these V4A patches.
Super useful for automating code mods.
Yeah.
Are there other diff formats it handles well too? Or is it just V4A?
No, they mentioned others had high success rates too.
Yeah.
Specifically, the search replace format, which tools like Aider use,
Okay.
and also a pseudo XML format they tested.
And what makes these different formats work well?
The key things they share with V4A are no line numbers and really clear delimiters marking exactly what code gets replaced and what the new code is.
Clarity and context seem to be the recurring themes here.
Definitely. So while V4A is recommended, there's flexibility if your workflow uses something like search replace.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that was certainly a comprehensive deep dive into this new guide. If someone's listened through all this, what are the absolute key things they should take away?
I'd say first, GPT 4.1 is powerful but literal. Adapt your prompts for clarity and explicitness. Second, embrace agentic workflows using those persistence, tool calling, and maybe planning reminders.
Okay. Literalness and agents.
Third, use that long context, strategically organized prompts.
Yeah.
Tune context reliance. Fourth, chain of thought is still useful, even if induced, for complex tasks.
Long context and spew.
Fifth, leverage its strong instruction following, but be precise. And finally, for developers, the new diff capabilities, especially with formats like V4A, are a big step forward for AI coding assistance.
It really underscores that getting the best out of these models is becoming, well, a real skill. AI engineering, as they say.
Exactly. And the guide itself says AI engineering is inherently an empirical discipline. You've got to experiment, iterate, see what works for your specific problem.
No magic bullet, just practice and refinement.
Precisely. And that leads us to maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
With these new capabilities, especially this high steerability and the need for such precise communication, how might our own roles change? As communicators, as problem solvers interacting with AI.
What new skills become essential when the AI listens this closely?
Yeah. Exactly. It's something interesting to think about as you start playing with GPT 4.1 and these prompting techniques. How does it change how you work?
A fascinating question indeed. Well, thank you for guiding us through this.
My pleasure.
And thanks everyone for joining us for this deep dive into OpenAI's GPT 4.1 Prompting Guide. We hope it gives you a great starting point. Until next time.